Hello and welcome to a re-recorded part 4, and there'll also be a re-recorded part 5. I haven't had time to get 1, 2, and 3 re-recorded, but I'm hoping, if the modifications I've made fix the sound issues that have been in 1 and 2, then hopefully I will go back and re-record them and edit them together. But again, this is a continuation of the series with Dan Friedman, the excellent one, who you'll find a link to his YouTube down below in the description. And if you do like these videos on the London Naval Treaty, as I said, this is part 4 of 5 of the introductions. The live will be, this should go out at 6 a.m. on the morning of the day of the live. So in 12 hours' time when this comes out. Then I hope you'll join us for the live. I am hoping this all works, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for taking part, and fingers crossed. And, well, more importantly, Iron Brew arrived. Right, on with the show. The London Naval Treaty, we did part 1 and part 2.
Yeah.
So we now got to part 3, which is starts off with sort of the joyous, this is, and I'm now going into this part will probably be going to the audience, so I will admit this now. This is the part where Britain's diplomacy really comes to the fore. If you haven't realised it from what we've been saying going through already, this treaty is in many ways slightly advantageous to the Royal Navy. Although they would never admit it, in fact, bellyaching about how problematic it was and how much difficulty it caused was probably a very major reason why no one noticed what it gave them in so many, many ways. Mm-hmm.
You know so much more about this than I do, so I will 100% accept that, and accept that I suspect the people who've been writing that the plan was to have, or the goal was to have 70 cruisers, weren't happy about this one, but I don't know how wedded anyone actually was, or how much they actually thought that would ever happen.
They wanted the 70 cruisers. The 70 cruisers were important, mainly to having the desired presence around the world you needed. But you've then got a sort of realism when you start looking at the British cruiser numbers, and if you add in things like the Tribal class destroyers, which can build up, and you add in the fact that they now have aircraft carriers, and when they were talking about 70 cruisers, they didn't have quite as many aircraft, especially not when they have start things having escort carriers, etc., come in, and those ones, the Woolworth carriers. You start to realise that they always had ideas for how to get around it without having 70 cruisers.
Oh, and they also knew that they were building the sloops. They just didn't need to build many of them until things were getting really hairy.
And with the cruisers are something you do need to build before war, and having a nice sum that you can always use to go together. 70 does sound a nice round figure.
Yes, and it's
though on even the combined, and this is the thing, if you combine, and we'll get into this in a second, the total tonnage that the British were allowed for cruisers. In under this treaty, which is near as nothing makes no difference. 339,000 imperial tons, or 344,424 metric tons. If you divide that by 70, you get, I don't know, 4,500 tons per cruiser. You're never going to get a decent cruiser for 4,500 tons. The Arethusa class are 5,354 tons, and this is metric tons I'm talking in. So that's just not going to happen. And they know that. And they know that with the treaties. The moment they start getting treaties, they realize the likelihood of them getting to 70. But the idea was to get to 70 in time for war. So when the treaty started to fail, the thing was they were hoping to have enough of an industry, enough of things maintainable that they could build up to 70 before war, because 70 cruisers was it's not so much wedded to the idea, but it's knowing that the reality is, you are going to lose ships. You are going to have ships be needing maintenance. Some of those 70 ships are going to be quite old ships and therefore not suitable for frontline duties. Some of those ships are going to get damaged and need to be fixed.
Yep. Oh yeah, and
all these things means you need more ships than you probably would normally need, and this is half the trouble with some of the modern navies at the moment, because they definitely have enough ships for what they need in peacetime.
Yeah.
But they have no slack if there's a war. They have nothing to take up if there is a war.
Or you slack, or if it turns out that the engines don't work in warm waters or warm environments, like, say, the ones that Britain has been worrying about almost exclusively since 1990.
Yeah, the Type 45s are fun, but there again, that's an old issue of specifications. They were trying a new engine type, and this does happen even in 1930s. You have issues, 1920s, 1930s. You have issues of ships and design and engines.
Oh, yeah.
It's an ongoing thing in the life of that. You will write specifications, and then someone will try and go, well, to save money, if we massage these specifications down a bit, it'll still be able to do 80% of the task, but it'll be 50% of the cost.
Yeah.
All the cost is in the last 20%.
Yeah. The Japanese were the worst at that. They had to just rebuild, it feels like, pretty much everything in 34 after one of their torpedo boats.
Yes, they pretty much find out that they've been making their destroyers literally of balsa wood. But right, so we're in part 3 of this treaty, and I'm going to start out by reading Articles 14 and 15 together. Article 14, the naval combatant vessels of the United States, the British Commonwealth of Nations, and Japan, other than capital ships, aircraft carriers, and all vessels exempt from limitation under Article 8, sloops, shall be limited during the term of the present treaty as provided in its Part 3, and in the case of special vessels as provided in Article 12. Article 15. For the purpose of this Part 3, the definition of the cruiser and destroyer categories shall be as follows. Cruisers. Surface vessels of war other than capital ships or aircraft carriers, the standard displacement of which exceeds 1,850 tons, 1,880 metric tons, or with a gun above 5.1 inch, 130 millimeter caliber. The cruiser category is divided into 2 subcategories as follows. A. Cruisers carrying a gun above 6.1 inch, 155 millimeter caliber. And B. Cruisers carrying a gun not above 6.1 inch, 155 millimeter caliber. Destroyers. Surface vessels of war, the standard displacement of which does not exceed 1,850 tons, and with a gun not above 5.1 inch caliber. Now, 1,850 tons for a destroyer sounds like the figure which comes out for the tribals, because later on the next treaty along produces the idea of the destroyer leader, which is going 1,850 tons, and the rest of the destroyers are going to be limited below. So, actually, at this point, the Royal Navy is allowed to build larger destroyers. They're not building larger destroyers. Why? Well, the reason is all this comes down to Article 16, and we'll talk about these 3 articles together because they really do matter together. Yeah. Article 16, the completed tonnage in the cruiser, destroyer, and submarine categories, which is not to be exceeded on 31st December 1936, is given in the following table. Categories: cruisers. A, with guns of more than 6.1 inch, 155 millimeter caliber. The United States is allowed 180,000 imperial tons. The British Commonwealth nations are allowed 146,800 tons. Japan is allowed 108,400 tons. B, with guns of 6.1 inch, 155 millimeter caliber or less, the United States is allowed 143,500 tons. The British Commonwealth nations is allowed 192,200 tons. The Japanese are allowed 100,450 tons. For destroyers, It's 150,000 tons for both Britain and Japan, Britain and America, 105,500 tons for Japan. And submarines, it's 52,700 tons for both Britain and America. And guess what? Japan gets 52,700 tons as well, so it gets parity. Two vessels which, yeah, I'll just finish it, and then we'll get into chat because this one's going to be a long chat. Two vessels which cause the total tonnage in any category to exceed figures given in the foregoing table shall be disposed of gradually during the period ending on the 1st of December 1936. The maximum number of cruisers of subcategory A shall be as follows: for the United States, 18; for the British Commonwealth nations, 15; for Japan, 12. I.e., the USA is allowed 18 heavy cruisers. The Royal Navy, 15. Japan, 12. In the destroyer category, not more than 16% of the allowed total tonnage shall be employed in vessels of over 1,500 tons. This is, as I said, creating the super destroyer. 1,524 metric tons stand displacement. So, destroyer leaders, super destroyers, tribal class, here they come. Destroyers completed or under construction of the 1st April 1930 in excess of the percentage may be retained, but no other destroyers exceeding 1,500 tons, 1,500 tons, or 1,524 metric tons stand displacement shall be constructed or acquired until a reduction to such 16% has been effected. Not more than 25% of the allowed total tonnage in the cruiser category may be fitted with a landing on platform or deck for aircraft. And it is it is understood that the submarines referred to in paragraphs 2 and 3 of Article 7 will be counted as part of the total submarine tonnage of the high contracting party concerned. 7. The tonnage of any vessels maintained under Article 13 or disposed of in accordance with Article with Annex 2 to Part 2, the present treaty shall not be included in tonnage subject to limitations. So why do these three articles matter? Because if you hadn't realized it from those sums, let me explain it. The USA and Britain are supposed to be equals. This is what this has all been about. 10-10-7. That's the relationship. Britain, America, Japan. And this is always seen as Britain conceding the world to America in some respects. But here's the reality. The British have secured 15,500 more imperial tons or 15,748 more metric tons of cruiser tonnage than the Americans. Let me put that in realistic figures. That equates to a town class and an Arethusa class extra than what the Americans could build, or 2 Leander class cruisers more than what the Americans could build. And that's, of course, what the Royal Navy is caring about. That's why we're talking about 70 cruisers at the beginning of this, because that's what the Royal Navy is carrying. And I've now spoken for way too long. Dan, please take over.
Yeah. So I think I'm trying to think how to dissect this. So the other things which kind of leap out at me a bit, and this is a point made by Jordan in his book, is that the percentage with the destroyers, so kind of starting with the smallest ones, that is two things. So the 16% exactly equates to, I think it's, and I'm just double checking on Wikipedia, the exact number. It's 8 or 9 of the kind of private ships. I think it's 8 private ships and a flotilla leader, which is what they're building with things like with their letter classes, the A's, B's, C's, D's, E's, F's.
It does exactly fit with the flotilla leader required for the rest of the ships.
Which Britain is using, whereas to a fairly large extent, the Japanese and the Americans are taking, and I think some of the other, France, Italy, possibly, I can't remember.
Yes.
Are taking that tonnage from their light cruisers. They put a light cruiser to lead a destroyer flotilla. The Royal Navy is using an actual flotilla leader.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes out to, so this is to give this maximized destroyer tonnage. So you're not
and maximize cruiser tonnage again. This is for Britain.
Sorry,
You know,
yeah, sorry, that's sorry. I mean,
it's maximized for both because
yeah.
it allows you to have some very capable destroyers to do. Because the reason you have these cruiser leaders, it's you need space for a commander staff, or the cruiser leaders in terms of destroyer groups. You need someone to lead the destroyers, to be the sort of staff leader, but also they have to carry facilities for things which the rest of the destroyers will not have. The destroyers won't have space for, and they are part of the protection for those destroyers going in. Their firepower is key to getting those destroyers into a position they can launch an attack from. This is why the Royal Navy builds the tribal class destroyers it does, because yes, it's building some great destroyer leaders, but at a certain point it realizes, hang on, we're going to need some hefty firepower to get these destroyers close.
The Royal Navy has been going, and people, especially who play World of Warships and look at that, and look at the Japanese and their torpedoes, and seeming obsession with torpedoes, don't get that the Royal Navy kind of had the same idea. They just didn't go quite as nuts on the Long Lance idea, which was a risky prospect.
It was high risk, high reward potentially for the Japanese. That's what I think. But you also have to remember the different doctrines they're building to. You know, the reason the British, the Royal Navy has the tribal class destroyers, which are these sort of cruiser destroyers, to fill in the cruiser role and to do the destroyer role, is because that makes sense to them for their tonnage, because they need the cruisers. The reason they need the cruisers is because they're looking at fighting a global war. Japan is looking, and their war plans are based on the idea of having the American fleet and the British fleet, if necessary, come to them, and them taking them out as they come to them.
Yeah.
And then they launch this war of aggression, where they're taking this territory, and yet that means they extend their own lines of communication, their own lines of things. So when the fleets start coming to them, they can't do the attrition that they were planning on.
Yeah, I think the Second World War does not really go how anyone thinks it will go at sea.
Well, I would argue, to an extent, the Royal Navy's worst nightmare was how it turned up. They did have a sort of idea that would happen, but it was the one they were really praying wouldn't happen, because they knew that, and this is going to sound like, there is no way in peacetime they were going to get the money and the support necessary to prepare for fighting that war.
Yeah. Because the problem was that you've got the home nation, and from what I can tell, I think there was a degree of unhappiness within the Commonwealth, with the Dominions, that the Dominions really were not spending a great deal on defence. And I think there was a lot that fell onto kind of Britain. Now, admittedly, Britain was part funding that through kind of the industries and the trade with the still empire bits, the colonies and India. So it's not a kind of total disproportionate thing. But, you look at the Canadian Navy, Royal Canadian Navy in the interwar period, which I think amounted to a rowing boat and one oar. And I mean, I know it went on to amazing things during the Second World War, and it's not a criticism per se, but they really hadn't been spending on defence, because who was going to invade them? The Americans. And similarly, Australia, was cancelling orders and unsure about things, and these weren't tiny economies that you're talking about there, and South Africa didn't have a navy at all. So there is the weight of
Britain's caught sort of in the catch-22, kind of like America is at the moment, in that being the primus inter pares of a global alliance, which is what it really is with the dominions, especially the major dominions at this point, is very expensive. You want them to spend more, but if they spend more, then they get a bigger voice in what happens. And if they get a bigger voice in what happens, they might not want to do what you want to do. So,
and the problem is they demonstrated that.
Yeah.
With it was a standoff with Turkey in, I think, late 22. Britain was sort of trying to gear up to mobilise. It was about when Turkey was turning into the Republic of Turkey from the Ottoman Empire, and Greece, and there were protectorates and things. I can't remember the whole details. It really confused me when I looked into it. But the Canadians just went, no, we're not going to turn up for that. I don't think the Canadians were wrong, but I think it was a real shock to the system. And the difficulty is that when it comes to then protecting Australia, New Zealand and things from Japan in the Pacific and things, they've not got particularly large forces to be turning around and going, we need stuff back. I mean, they've got some, but Australia had 5 or 6 cruisers at most, and about 6 geriatric destroyers. Yes. That's really not a great deal when you're looking at what the Royal Navy's looking at as in its totals. So you're kind of looking at having to subsidise that, and when the Japanese come and attack and start threatening, Britain, attrition, everything else just doesn't have it. And I mean, you look at the Royal Navy's losses in the kind of late 41 into 42, and even without Prince of Wales and Repulse, it's pretty horrific.
Yes.
And it's damage not just, it's damage that's going to take months and months and months to fix, because some incredibly brave Italian frogmen have come along and planted limpet mines on your brilliant battleships that have had the Warspite refit and haven't really got properly involved. We spent so much time doing down the Italians.
They are really good.
Some of these things are so good. It is their senior leadership that lets them down.
I think you and I have said this many times before. It is the senior leadership, but it is one of this. It's one of the situation you're dealing with. You've got these treaties, and they are these articles. They have a big impact. But the thing I always find interesting is the fact that Japan gets equality in terms of tonnage for submarines. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at this. You can argue it is Britain trying to limit the total number of submarines for everyone in the world by keeping numbers down.
I mean, bear in mind, Britain had gone into Washington in 22 going, let's ban submarines completely. Let's say no one has a submarine ever again.
Yeah, they were really keen on that idea.
That's a genuine negotiating point.
But let's be honest, if you do that, you then take off all the weight of ASW gear from your destroyers. You don't have to worry about building quite as many sloops or corvettes in wartime. It's brilliant. Imagine World War II with no submarines,
or at least no submarines developed or worked on
for about 25 years.
Yeah.
Well, no, let's be honest. 20 years.
15 to 20.
22 to 20 years.
Mid-30s.
Well, you see, the thing is, I was thinking there wasn't really much development done really during World War One, so I was pushing back development. But as sort of that, there was a lot of technology which comes in World War One, but it's not really newly developed stuff. It's stuff which is being developed prior to World War One. It's just not been cost effective to implement it. But
to operationalize it, and I think there's a lot of doctrine development and
skills development, and if you take that away for 15, 20 years, and you don't have people actually at sea doing it,
I just think take away a capability for, people have been talking about the US Marines losing the capability of tanks, and people seem to forget. I mean, the US Army has crazy numbers of tanks, and I'm sure they'll lend a few. But the British Army,
if someone twists their arm enough,
or just say, well, the Marines said you couldn't do it, and then I'm pretty sure the US Army would be in there like a shot. Just
yeah, probably.
Just provoke them that way.
Yeah.
Or say, well, the Canadians were going to come along and do it for us. If you guys can't.
All the Brits, just say,
Yeah. Germans.
Yeah. There are lots of options.
Yeah. Actually, Australians. Yeah.
They've got quite good tanks.
And they get on well with the US Marines. But I'm going off the point, sorry. The issue with the submarines is the Japanese, again, I'm reading from Jordan, which, they really, really are fabulous books.
They are.
I really, really think they are excellently written. And I've been going through trying to separate fact from opinion, and then my own opinions, going through them. But he was saying that Japan kind of had reckoned that they had on order, and sorry, I did write this down. So at the point when the treaty went into effect, they had something like 80,000 standard displacement tons of submarines either built, building, or on order.
Yes.
And their idea was that they would need at least 72,000, nearly 83,000, and that their specific strategy would require a minimum of 78,000 standard tons. So actually 52,700 is 2/3 of that.
Yes.
Now, the Royal Navy, just about at this point, is just giving up on the idea of the fleet submarine.
Yeah, it's taken them a long time. We have to admit that they did get fixated on that idea for quite a while. Oh my.
It makes sense, but just the submarine propulsion systems could not keep pace.
No, it doesn't. It's a lovely idea, but it doesn't make sense the moment you start to engage reality at all.
If you look at them as submersible torpedo boats, and you say, well, we've got this torpedo boat destroyers, which starts off as torpedo boats, then they took on the idea of trying to kill their enemy. You're really just going, we want that, but instead of just going crazy fast, kind of paint it bright red so it goes faster, sort of do everything you can to get in, launch your torpedoes, and maybe run away, maybe explode in a shower of bits of hot metal if a battleship gun hits you.
Let's be honest, if a battleship shell hits most destroyers, it's going straight through and blowing up the other side. If it blows up.
I was thinking it might go through a boiler or something.
As long as if it manages to hit, not the boiler, possibly the gearbox has enough. Gearbox or turbine would have enough metal in it.
Yeah.
The boiler's pretty heavy metal, but I don't think it's heavy enough metal to set off those
the boiler
things.
itself will go pop.
Possibly. The boiler will go boom.
Yeah.
Not a nice thing to think about.
How did they get anyone to be an engineer on these ships? I just don't understand it. It just sounds terrifying. It was noisy. It was dirty. You had no idea what was going on the surface. And you were dealing with just insane steam at ridiculous pressures. This kind of superheated, super condensed steam.
Yes.
I mean, it's scary enough when you look at steam trains.
It sounds
Something
fun
good.
to me.
And then you go, yes, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it at sea, and people are going to shoot at you. What are they going to shoot? Like sponges? Paintballs? No, large lumps of metal, some of which will have explosives in them. And I'm standing next to something that's basically a bomb
Yes.
in itself.
Yes.
Yes. And in the event the ship gets hit somewhere else, I'm not going to know about it until we're probably doing our impression of a submarine.
Yep.
Yeah. How did they persuade anyone to be an engineer?
It's a good job, and if you're technically minded, it's a good. It's an interesting job, especially at the time for what's available. But no, these.
Hello, I think I've disappeared the wrong thing. There we go. That's the right thing back. So, I hope you enjoyed part 4 of 5. I hope the sound was better then. And thank you very much for watching. As I said, if you do like these, please do subscribe and press the little bell. And check out Dan Freeman's account. There's a link down below. And there are more of these. If this is the first one you've watched out of the whole series, you're probably wondering what in the we are talking about. So I'd go back and start with part 1 or the live. Either. Take care. See you soon.